Hey, what's up, mortals? It's Miggy Sawdust here with a new video for you. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 6 of What If Deku Had a Luck Quirk. Just wanted to greet you all by just saying, sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. Let's get started. Bakugo sat as still as Izuku, unmoving as he tried to comprehend what was before him. One for all? Fighting all for one? Inheriting quirks? And who is this skeleton of a man who sat before him? It was a lot to take in, but with Toshinori sitting before him, there was no way to deny the truth. There were only questions left, and the human grenade wanted answers. Why would you tell me this, All Might? Wouldn't it be a massive problem if... Calm down, young Bakugo. I'm sure you have a lot of things to ask, but let me finish explaining. The conversation continued as All Might explained that his time limit left a couple of hours for him, as he had not given away his quirk, and then dropped the point of the conversation to Bakugo. And you want me to inherit one for all? Toshinori nodded, and Bakugo took a moment to think it through. He had always wanted to be number one, and although he was going to do his damn best to make it a reality by working hard, this was going to completely solidify his standing. It almost seemed unfair. At the same time, it was an offer too tempting to pass, especially when the human grenade thought about the USJ incident. The way All Might and Aizawa worked together to fight off the villains was a sight that he wanted to be. It would be a step towards his dream. Glancing at the motionless Izuku, he solidified his resolve before nodding, accepting the luck that had come his way. Just as the bell rang for the end of the lunch, Bakugo rolled the wheelchair towards the class with a grim expression on his face. Does this mean some kid needs to swallow my hair when I'm older? Dismissing the thought for another day, Bakugo held the address to his recommended internship of an old hero called Gran Torino, as he wondered what was going to happen with Izuku. At that moment, Aizawa walked past and paused to catch the blonde's attention. Submitting the internship application, the eraser hero then explained how he could take in Izuku for the time being. There was another student that he was going to have a word with during that time too, and hopefully, by seeing another student train in a similar fighting style, Izuku could start coming out of his shell. The human grenade nodded, and when internships rolled around the next day, Bakugo set off to explore his new quirk. Within the training grounds of Ground Beta, Aizawa stationed Izuku so the boy could watch the learning before him. Shinso walked out in his sports uniform, and a similar scarf to Aizawa, with a look of determination on his face. The homeroom teacher opened a silver briefcase that contained Izuku's hero outfit, and pulled out the scarf before placing it on the Silent One's hands. Guess we'll begin. The faint images of the teacher and Shinso fell short to Izuku's mind. He couldn't process anything that was before him as if he had lost all his senses. He couldn't see ahead of himself, and everything was pitch black like the endless pits of his own mind. Emotions that he spent years trying to collect were slipping by like fine sand through his fingers, and Izuku could already feel his hollow self wasting away. Like a ghost, not part of the real world, he felt like he was drowning in air, locked in a room with no light, windows, or door. It was so devastatingly dark that he couldn't even see his own body, let alone find a way out. He was vaguely aware of what was going on outside of his shell. Muffled sounds would sometimes make their way in, but it was too loud for the boy to honestly care. It was just easier to let sleep wash over him and rest within his own silent world. He didn't want to leave anymore. It was safer inside. No one could hurt him if he didn't let anyone in. You've got to hold it tighter. Don't be afraid to get tangled. Words continued to occasionally fall into the dark, bottomless shaft that Izuku forever fell through, but it was too much effort to try and acknowledge them. They felt familiar, though, and it was somewhat nice to keep the words with him. They had a gentle glow to them, and it was nice to watch them float around with him in the endless and empty space. Don't worry about breaking the scarf, you're not going to. Even if you could, we can replace it. Another bunch of words came down, just as warm as the others, floating down to join Izuku within his dark space. They were nice to look at, and although Izuku was still not able to process them, it was comforting to have them around. Come on, Izuku, let's go home. The word home fell down the gray fog, and Midoriya sat up in confusion. It was neither warm nor chilling as it gave a soft, neutral glow. Was home even real? Memories from when Inko was still around flooded his mind, and he wished he could go back. He wished he could change his past so he could see a future where his mother was still around. It was at the end of elementary when Izuku was forced to realize that even during middle school, he wouldn't be able to make friends. Elementary had just finished, but the boy came to acknowledge that with his quirk, friends just weren't an option. The negative thoughts were so intense, so painful that when the boy left his room for dinner, it was too late. Opening the door, the first thing he saw was a dead body. The hot pan was on the woman's leg, and what was going to be dinner had spilt on the floor. A cutting board had fallen, also on the unfortunate woman's body, causing the sharp knives to cut into her, the most likely cause of her death. The sight was too much for the child, and as his emotions ran wild, the apartment exploded. What was even home anymore? That place had burnt down with almost all of his happiness. Was there even a place he could feel safe anymore? Not wanting to think anymore, he laid back down to rest within the empty space of silence. "Katsuki, what happened to your arm?" Even if he couldn't care for himself anymore, Izuku's ears perked up ever so slightly at the sound of the blonde boy's potential injury. There was a brief explanation of accidentally going a little bit past his own limits during the internship, and Mitsuki sighed before ushering them inside. Midoriya was restless, though, as he finally acknowledged some words that had been floating there for the past 2 days, and realized that his friend was probably resting from his new quirk. That was when he remembered something. All for one. His brain started to whirl with thoughts as Izuku connected dots, seeing the full picture from the side. Bakugo had inherited One for All, solidifying that he had to potentially fight the very person Midoriya wanted to meet. A small glimmer of hope started to grow within the student as more memories lit up within his dark and still world. He wanted to return to the place where he felt emotions, the place where the air was easier to breathe, the place that was loud and rowdy but filled with warmth. He was unsure when such feelings had filled his empty body, but he wasn't going to question it now. Mr. Aizawa. It was a few days into the internship, and Shinso finally managed to successfully grab the stationary opponent and pulled it towards himself. At that point, the training had come to an end, and the purple-haired boy glanced at Izuku. There had been no movements for the whole time, but there was suddenly a change. The teacher got up from marking papers to see the commotion, and also noticed a subtle change. The hero student's capture scarf that had laid loosely in the boy's hands was now held taut, although the rest of his body didn't move. It didn't matter, however, as it meant something was happening, and the teacher sighed in relief. There had been a meeting on what would happen if Izuku didn't wake up, and none of the talks were pleasant. Because the luck quirk meant Izuku essentially came to no physical harm, they had to discuss the possibility of placing him in a heavily guarded room, where nothing could go in or out. Essentially, the boy would be kept like a prisoner, and Aizawa wouldn't stand for it. It didn't matter now since it seemed like Izuku was showing movement, and it was just in time. The teacher was planning to take Shinso out for patrolling anyway, and they could head out to the police chief to update him on the news. With both the mind and luck manipulators in tow, the Eraser hero called the police chief for his location, and the three of them started to head for Hosu City. The sighting of the potential hero killer had led them there after all. A quick train ride over, and they barely had any time to step onto the platform when an explosion could be heard in the distance. The three heroes immediately reacted, and Aizawa was quickly informed that a Nomu had crashed the train immediately after them. Apparently, Gran Torino and Bakugo were on that train, and the elderly hero had immediately acted to take the creature down. The human grenade stood by the gaping hole in the train when he spotted the familiar faces getting closer, waiting for the station to come into sight. Izuku! Bakugo, good, you're here. I'm going to assist the police with any Nomu, so take Izuku. You have permission to use your quirks to help redirect civilians. You three are only heroes in training, so don't engage the enemy if you can. With the explanation and warning said out loud, the teacher swung off into the distance and the boys looked at each other and nodded. Since the Nomu were flying loose in the streets, they figured hiding the people in small shops and buildings would be the safest. So Shinso went to help open as many doors, mind-controlling those who were too panicked to act as the human grenade set off a loud explosion from his palms. The civilians who heard the noise turned to see the blonde with a wheelchair by his side, and many recognized him as the aggressive boy from the sports festival. They followed him despite their initial doubts, as the boy was wheeling Izuku quickly but carefully, and together, they successfully cleared the station and the nearby streets into hiding. They continued to work together, getting closer and closer to the center of Hosu City, where the sky was filled with smoke and fire. It was a horrid sight as they could see Nomu in the distance, and Bakugo growled before turning into an empty alleyway.
Mr. Aizawa told us to stay away.
The blonde ignored the offhanded retort from Shinso before turning into another random alley. He was honestly trying his best at restraining his actions, because he couldn't help but want to jump headfirst into action. However, he had a level head on his shoulders, and respected the Eraser Hero as someone who not only helped fight for Izuku's freedom at present, but someone who gave Midoriya hope when they were small. Izuku never told him who saved him from the fire, but now, Izuku's admiration for the lesser-known hero made sense. He had walked into the alleys as a way of both to keep Izuku safe and to stay away from the fight, but at this point, he should have expected what was about to happen. This video is sponsored by Adobe. Adobe is redefining the digital experience through game-changing innovations that shape the next generation of storytelling. Adobe makes it easier to create, edit, and share digital documents securely, allowing you to collaborate and communicate across devices. Adobe Photoshop is your go-to application for raster graphics editing and digital art as a whole. At We the Celestials, all our thumbnails across every channel are created with Adobe Photoshop. Adobe Premiere Pro is a timeline-based and non-linear video editing software application that is versatile and easy for beginners and master editors. Finally, Adobe After Effects is the industry-standard tool for digital visual effects, motion graphics, and compositing applications used in post-production. Many of our voice actors, audio editors, and video editors use Premiere Pro and After Effects to produce these high-quality videos. Click the link in the description below to start creating now. And thank you to Adobe for sponsoring this video.
Just our luck.
The crimson blood that oozed from Iida's shoulder shone darkly against the cold knife that held him down. The deranged figure that stood above him slowly turned around, eyes filled with annoyance as a child had come running after him. It was the hero killer that had been on the news recently, living up to his nickname as he was targeting Native. This vigilante was an opponent the students knew they shouldn't face. Yeah. Shinso took a step forward, hands gripping his capture scarf to calm his pounding heart. You're the hero killer, right? With his eyebrows furrowed into an irritated glare, the killer got off Iida before taking a step towards the three. Bakugo immediately stood before Izuku's wheelchair as Shinso held his ground at the front. The vigilante seemed to like the response as he pulled the knife from Iida's shoulder, licking the blood that ran down the blade, creating a spine-chilling moment for the boys to witness.
What do you want? Got you.
Shinso immediately told both Iida and Native not to move, warning them how a rough movement could be enough to pull Stain out of the trance. The class representative nodded, but then he explained he couldn't move, describing it as if his body had been frozen in place. They were lucky the hero killer was no longer above the student's body, resulting in Bakugo and Shinso working together to lift the boy off the ground and lay him beside Native. Just as the frozen heroes were sitting down safely, however, a purple mist materialized out of nowhere. It was directly under Izuku, and Bakugo could feel his own blood stop. Time seemed to move in slow motion as the mist wrapped around Izuku, swallowing the student, share and all, before disappearing.
So, he's the one.
Leaving a ferocious Bakugo to scream into the nothingness, Kurogiri reappeared at the top of the building with Shigaraki waiting for him. The man-child inspected the unmoving child before him, grinning, listening to a voice that spoke in his head.
So he should still roughly hear us, huh? Good. Good.
The events that had occurred did indeed reach down to the bringer of silence, causing the boy to try and rapidly figure out the situation. Since no external force had stopped the League from taking him, he was clear from potential physical harm, but it concerned Izuku how the League seemed to know as much as they did.
We're here to offer you a deal.
Kurogiri's mist then covered the unmoving student's ears, connecting the air inside to a different place, and what Izuku heard next was not what he had expected.
Good evening, student of UA, Izuku. You may know me as All for One.
All for One? Midoriya internally stiffened as he realized who he was talking to, mind busy with thoughts in contrast to his doll-like body. I'm certain you're aware of who I am, that I'm the one who can both give and take quirks. A useful quirk I'm sure you in particular are interested in. He wasn't sure how the villain had found out at first, but then remembered his last memories of the USJ. The burst water pipe kept Kurogiri down and helped knock Shigaraki out when the portal creator tried to escape. The day was seemingly saved as Bakugo cheered on their teachers, enveloped in a clean and pure glow that was similar to All Might's. His last thoughts before passing out was his wish to be rid of his quirk, and to join his friend on this other side of his impenetrable glass world. It was all he wanted, and Midoriya paused before connecting the dots. Kurogiri had helpfully delivered the desperate unconscious pleas of yours, and I'm here to answer it. Aren't I gracious? Izuku didn't know how to respond to the villain, who sighed before finishing up his end of the offer. I offer a new quirk. I collect a new quirk, and you can rid yourself of the burden holding you down. It's a very simple decision. And if those heroes still don't want you after you've gotten rid of your quirk, you can find your home here at the League. The luck manipulator had only briefly considered if Hero Society would still take him in after taking help from the League, and now that the possibility of freeing himself was before him, he didn't realize how much he would hesitate. It was the Hero Society that helped him through the toughest time, but right now, it seemed that the villains would be the ones that could stop the pain. There was a lot to try and process, but he couldn't do it now as All for One continued to speak. I'll give you some time to think this through. You students have a summer camp every year, so I'll give you an opportunity to come find us during that. Let's hope you come to a decision by then. With that, Kurogiri's mist moved away from Izuku's ears, and Shigaraki grinned unnervingly. I'll forgive you for that water prank you pulled at the USJ if you join us. I'm recruiting a bunch of newbies starting today, and I can have you reserved for one. Izuku knew he shouldn't pay attention to anything the villains were saying right now, believing the heroes would want him for his hard work once he was quirkless. But a doubt was starting to fester within his consciousness. The villain's words were almost sweet and inviting, telling him he was wanted and needed no matter how he was. And the boy felt sick realizing the Hero Society did not feel the same. Kurogiri's portal wrapped around his wheelchair, and the boy reappeared back in the alleyway, returning him physically safe and sound. Bakugo, he's back! Shinso immediately called Aizawa and Bakugo, as the blonde had run off to find the teacher, leaving the mind controller to watch Native, Iida, and the still frozen Stain. The call was unnecessary, however, as the two were right around the corner, almost crashing into the vigilante as they appeared. The general studies student informed them how Izuku had returned the way he disappeared, in a ball of purple-black mist, and the human grenade confirmed that it was the same one from the USJ incident. The teacher nodded before examining the student, noticing how there were a couple of more changes. The casual hold of his capture scarf was now in a tight grip, and Izuku's complexion was starting to return a little. Thank God. Izuku eternally apologized to his blonde friend, who sat on his heels out of relief. He was now internally active, but there seemed to be a switch in this body somewhere that had been turned off. He paid it no mind, however, as he had a lot to think about, and staying inside was a good place to sort out his thoughts. The homeroom teacher uneasily furrowed his brow as he ushered the students away from the scene. The police chief was already on his way with Endeavor and Gran Torino in tow, the ones more specialized to deal with the mess. It had been an awful evening, and the Eraser Hero didn't want to think about the later consequences just yet. His priority was to get his students back safe, and that was exactly what he did. The police chief gave Aizawa, Manuel, and Gran Torino a week's suspension of their teaching license. The vigilante ended up escaping the heroes when a Nomu came in out of nowhere and dragged a police officer off, distracting the heroes long enough for the hero killer to disappear. The aftermath of the Sane incident aside, Bakugo and Shinso were completely fine, and only Iida needed the hospital. Nothing was damaged beyond repair, and he would be fine by the time final exams came around. The class representative apologized for his behavior, and confessed his thirst for revenge, and then apologized again for endangering more people. Seeing Izuku kidnapped before his eyes forced him to snap out of his bloodlust, as he felt guilty for contributing more emotional damage to the Bringer of Silence. He was glad to hear that the luck manipulator was starting to move again, and thanked the others for saving him. The incident was kept under wraps, and by the time Izuku came to be aware of his surroundings again, it was to see how everyone had changed during their internships. Some, like Uraraka, had become physically stronger while some became more perceptive. Kirishima talking about seeing Tetsu, while a couple explained their horrible experiences. The biggest change, however, was probably Todoroki, who went to intern with Best Jeanist. Since the sports festival, the dual quirk user had finally come to understand that he had to change. He wasn't exactly sure how, though, and his weak display of fire was not enough to get Endeavor screaming for joy. He just took the next best offer instead, which was the Denim Hero, signing to an agency who were very level-headed. Once there, the boy was given the perspective of a workforce that moved in sync, and was quite in awe of how Best Jeanist was at the heart of it. He learned to face the problems before him one step at a time, and block the negativity out. After all, a hero will face criticism, and they will have to deal with it. As a result, the dual quirk user began to interact with his classmates with his phone facing up for once. After all, he took the hero's advice literally and blocked the biggest negative in his life. He was just going to live in a hotel with the money in his bank account. With Kaminari starting a new Chiloroki nickname which caused said person to recoil in horror, the overall atmosphere of the classroom was one that felt much more comfortable than before. Iida sat everyone down as President Mike walked in to give the students their final exam prep talk. Aizawa still had a few days of his teaching license suspension, but instead of catching up on sleep or the massive amounts of paperwork he had, the Eraser Hero was sat in a room with the other significant figures, ready to give a report. He didn't want to think about the consequences, but it was his job. Mind heavy and worry peaked, the homeroom teacher then began to explain everything he knew and heard about Izuku, being transparent about the boy's capture and safe return. As he suspected, murmurs rippled through the room as the mention of the Bringer of Silence' unscathed return, and the hero grit his teeth to keep himself calm. He could roughly guess what was going on in Midoriya's head, as someone who also blames himself for a close person's death. The natural pressure of living was already overwhelming enough, and if the only safe place was planning to reject him, he would have gone insane. Aizawa tried to reason with the other heroes, but a key word had already started to spread, implanting itself in the minds of everyone else. Unfortunately, once recognized, ideas are hard to weed out. They were the defense for the country's peace, and they couldn't just shake off the possibility of Izuku being a traitor. If the worst scenario were to come, and they found out it was true, they would have no choice but to expel the student. With his quirk, they had to consider putting him into confinement where his physical body wouldn't be hurt. But with the League of Villains being brought into the picture, they had to consider the worst: the arrest of a UA student. Thank you all so much for indulging yourselves in all this information so far. Hope you enjoyed it. Now, there are a few things I'd like to go over before the video ends. Firstly, if you're in the mood for some great storytelling, We the Celestials have got you covered. Our We the Celestials, My Hero Academia, and Naruto What If channels retell the story of their namesake anime with a twist. Check it out if you're interested. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details can be found in the description below. Lastly, if you're interested in what we do here at We the Celestials, then I'd like to invite you to join us. The only caveat being that we only accept members from ages 16 years and up to join the crew. You can sign up for whatever category fulfills your interest by joining the recruitment Discord using the link in the description below. We're always looking for new members to join us. That's it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching again, and have a divine day.